This is For Keeps, a podcast about collections and connections. I'm David Peterkowski. On this show, I typically talk to people who've collected something interesting, or unusual, or unexpected for a long time. But every collector's got to start somewhere. So what if this time we turn the spotlight on someone whose collection is just getting started? Actually, this story really starts more than 50 years ago, with some mystery and a bit of divine inspiration. Picture in your mind's eye a painting of a train, an old-fashioned one chugging along on its tracks. Now imagine that the front of the train's engine bears a huge white cross, and those tracks aren't on the ground, but suspended in mid-air in a bright blue sky, spiraling up above the clouds toward their final destination, the gates of heaven. That striking and simplistically symbolic image graces the cover of Holy Train, a gospel album recorded in 1964 by the Swindell Brothers and the Reverend Johnny Wilkerson, and released on Savoy Records. Back in the 60s, Savoy's albums looked like no others. While most gospel album covers of that era featured photos of the musicians lined up, smiling and dressed in their Sunday best, roughly 175 of Savoy's covers, Holy Train among them, took a far more artistic approach. They used eye-catching paintings to illustrate the album titles, with bold colors, giant floating crosses, shafts of light emanating from the heavens, and landscapes that seemed like equal parts Norman Rockwell and Salvador Dali, of all people. In retrospect, Savoy's 1960s artwork might best be described as Sunday school surrealism. Adding to the mystique of these albums was the fact that the artist who painted the illustrations signed them with just one name, Harvey. For decades, Harvey's covers developed quite a following among music collectors and gospel historians, both for their surreal style and because Harvey was shrouded in mystery. Savoy's founder, Herman Lubitsky, was believed to be the only label employee to interact with Harvey. And when Lubitsky died in 1974, it seemed as though any hope of uncovering Harvey's identity went with him. In the ensuing decades, Harvey's legacy grew, and in 2005, a gospel music collector created the website harveyalbums.com, a showcase of all the bright, distinctive Harvey album art known to exist. Over the years, a number of internet articles celebrated and speculated on the work and identity of Harvey. And then, in 2014, something amazing happened. Harvey's sister and son discovered the online tributes, and they spoke up, revealing that Harvey was Harvey Williams, a New York-based artist and teacher who had died in 1987. After decades of guessing and dead ends, the mystery finally was solved. And that brings us to Robbie Rogers. He's a photographer and master's degree candidate at Baylor University in Texas, and he's a big-time Harvey head. He's devoting his master's thesis to the work of Harvey Williams, and he's hoping to bring the Williams family the recognition that he feels Harvey's work deserves. Robbie's also now a burgeoning collector of Harvey artwork, with a number of the old albums in his possession and more on the way. And just like that, another collector's obsession is up and running. When I found out that Robbie's devotion to the work and legacy of the long mysterious Harvey has turned him into a collector, I decided to reach out and learn more. In our conversation, Robbie told me about the significant price increase he's seen since he started collecting Harvey albums, the newfound and personal connection he's forged with Harvey's family, and his heartfelt desire to bring recognition to a little-known surrealist painter who made his unmistakable mark on gospel music. So, Robbie, I thought we'd begin with a little homework assignment I gave you as we were emailing back and forth to set this interview up. I had asked you to choose a Harvey album cover that you particularly like, and I'm wondering if you could kick things off by describing it here for us now.
It was really hard to pick because so many of them stand out to me. But I liked sort of the more, I guess, bizarre might be the word, covers, where it's sort of the giant hands or the cross. I mean, it almost looks like it was against his will sometimes, because I refer to it as gospel clip art, where it's a dove and a cross and a church and a Bible and hands. But I think there was something more to him. And the Roberta Martin singers have this great album cover. It's called It Was the Blood. And it's, this giant cross and just these little silhouettes of people underneath it, and the blood coming from the cross. He had just so much visual stuff going, and I think along with his life, he sounds, after talking with his sister and his son, it sounds like he was a troubled artist too. I mean, I think there were things going around in his life that this sort of let him have an outlet for it.
Mm-hmm. And it's sort of equal parts literal and very non-literal.
Right. I think there's a little bit of Disturbed in it when you look at it. And then there's the cornucopia of, bread and fruit sort of thing. I think he was playing to a producer that wanted this generalistic sort of art, and then came into being after producing, a couple hundred of these. He sort of found his own style. I know on the side he sold his own art on weekends in Greenwich Village, and that's how he pretty much sustained his earlier days. But I know with these covers too, you can almost see a pattern. You can see these habits sort of forming, but some of them are a little darker than others. I'm sort of drawn to those. I've noticed I've got a very small collection going, and I try, unfortunately, every week to add to this collection. And I'm trying to find some of these brighter color ones that he does. I mean, it's just, I can see the people he puts in them are people he knows. There's one album I bought that it almost looks like it's his son, Keith, in there. And then you see them reappear in other album covers, like the famous Caravans have one where it's an angel and then this boy kneeling down praying. Harvey was brilliant in the fact that he redid his work to make it generally consumable, that it could be for any album that you wanted it to be, that it was sort of open interpretation, if you will. Just the blues and the greens and the yellows, it always has that feeling of spring. And I think that's the basis of gospel music, too, to some of it. It's that rebirth. It's like Easter every day.
I'd never considered that, but that's a good point. And just to get back to It Was the Blood, just so people are clear about this, the drop of blood coming out of the giant cross is a perfect tear-shaped single drop of blood. It's very, like I said, very literal.
Yeah, so the way I understand it, in talking to his family, his religious beliefs weren't as deep as what these visual interpretations are. By all accounts, he wasn't a church-going sort of guy. He was an artist in New York, and he did believe in God, but wasn't drawn to that. I think the art sort of released it. I think this was sort of his religious walk of life, that he sort of took this. So, the teardrop, that is, a single drop of blood, I think he was trying to be very literal with these things, because gospel music does tend to go very literal, too. When you hear the songs and you hear the music paired with it, it's so literal that one of the covers is the pearly gates. And I'll tell you, my whole life, I never quite pictured giant pearls on it like Harvey actually drew on one of the covers, too. So I think he would sort of get some of this terminology and maybe do it literally, because maybe he didn't have the complete or deeper understanding to it.
Uh-huh. Maybe you can take us back, if you will, to how you first came across the album covers painted by Harvey and what it was about them that caught your attention. Do you remember sort of what kickstarted all of this?
I actually got a teaching fellowship at Baylor University, and we've had this collection. It's a Black Gospel Music Restoration Project. So we've already possessed thousands of pieces of work, albums, and there's photos, and it's a vast collection, because we know that gospel music is sort of falling off the face of the earth because it's not being saved anywhere. So we've gathered this collection. I've got to thank Bob Darden, who had the foresight to sort of gather this up. My project was initially to look at the album covers themselves, and initially I went in with the intent to find some famous photographers from the civil rights era and to see, how these covers were visually represented. To my shock, I found a lot of very basic photography. It was a group shot of a choir or an exterior of a church. And for the vast majority of gospel music from this era, it was pretty plain. But all of a sudden, every once in a while, I'd see these covers that are very vivid, very alive. I mean, they're vibrant. Everything's overemphasized there. It's surrealism, or at least a good dose of it. So I started seeing this, and I saw that it was just credited to an artist named Harvey. There was no last name, no other information. And one of the people within the collection, Eric Ames, he said, just jokingly, he's like, well, if you really want a project, why don't you find Harvey? He knew at the time, I didn't, that there are all sorts of websites and people have done research on this for years. And a man by the name of John Glassburner has collected all of Harvey's albums. And there's a speculation all over the internet of who Harvey was. And I love the story that the record producer was so cheap that he ended up charging the musicians for this artist, and then he painted them himself. And someone got some analysis of the art and said it was done by a Caucasian man in his 60s. I don't know how they determined that, but I'm not the art expert. I just sort of know what I like, and I sort of was drawn to this work. I sort of set out to find out the real story about who Harvey is, if that was possible, and stumbled upon his sister and his son. And I've since met with them and talked with them, and the story's sort of tragic because he only painted for a short number of years and then gave it up financially because he couldn't support his family anymore. And later on in life, his son and daughter-in-law presented him with some brushes and a canvas so he could paint again. But he'd worked so long at a funeral home that he had contracted arthritis so bad that he couldn't even hold a brush. So when they gave it to him, he just wept and knew that he could never paint again. I didn't really seek this collection out. For some reason, this collection sought me out. I wanted to tell the story in a proper tone of the importance of Harvey, because this work is so different that Savoy Records went on when other companies weren't. And I would go to speculate that the success of the record company was based upon how different these covers looked. For the vast majority of sales, the musicians were selling out of the trunk of their car at churches or in record stores at the time, and you had to stand out. You had to look different.
And that they did.
These look like nothing else. When you compare a black and white picture of a group in choir robes compared to these giant hands of God coming out of the sky and holding your church, that's different.
For sure. And when you started investigating and ultimately collecting some of Harvey's work, you really didn't know anything about him personally? The discovery of the family of the websites came while you were doing that work, is that right?
I found the family first. I saw the work, and I was probably more curious as a journalist. That's my background. I was more curious about the backstory. I mean, I'd already seen how different it was, but I didn't realize the quantity that he had done at that point. But I had another researcher help out, and Meg was fantastic because just in the very bottom of one of these websites was just a note that said, Harvey's no mystery, he's my brother. And at face value, I was wondering why somebody would claim it that wasn't true. But I sort of went out of my way and spent the next couple months proving that it was actually Harvey Williams who did this work through school records in New York and through addresses that he had on paintings that weren't on album covers, his individual sales from Greenwich.
Mm-hmm.
The mystery of it all, it might almost be better just this artwork standing on its own, and maybe he should have remained a mystery than it was just this Harvey. According to his sister, he never really wanted this credit for this work either. That's why he never put his last name on it. He wanted this to be something that was sort of mysterious. That's why it looks that way too when you see the staircases leading off and these sort of scenes that are a little bit cryptic. I think he intended that. I think all of this was intentional.
Mm-hmm. An artistic statement.
Yes, and he had a lot of statements to make. It really is amazing to see some of these things. even compared to modern day cover art. Growing up, I remember when the Boston cover came out, or Pink Floyd, or Sgt. Pepper's. You saw how different that was, and it sort of has that same flavor and flair. And I would not be surprised if some of those artists sort of borrowed from this collection to make their own sort of statement that was so different that it stood out on its own.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk to me a bit about the start of your Harvey collection. How has it manifested itself thus far? I know you've mentioned to me that you're a collector of a lot of things. What about Harvey art?
You know, there's something about holding it and touching it, and I am working on a master's thesis focused on Harvey. So I sort of wanted just to start with one or two to inspire me, because I needed something just to keep me going. And one or two turned into 5 or 10, and now it seems that the UPS man every day is delivering a flat package to me. There's just such a depth and breadth to Harvey's work, and it goes across all these spectrums, too, from light to dark, that I sort of want a little bit of everything. I hope I stop before I get every Harvey, and I keep it in a reasonable collection. But I can see this spiraling out of control.
Uh-huh. And what about non-albums, other Harvey works?
Other Harvey works are very hard for me to obtain. I would say some of it is probably because my lack of knowledge in the art field, and some of it, too, is that this was street art and purchased and displayed and most likely destroyed or left with family members. I have been able to come across 5 pieces, not including the family owns 2 personal pieces, the drawing of his son and then one of his sister. But the other pieces I found through just working on this album cover collection. One recently is a family in New York who were negotiating now to put on loan to the university. It was their aunt purchased it in New York and had just kept it in the house the whole time. She had recently passed. So they're looking for a place to sort of show it off, too. The artwork is much more surrealistic than any of the album covers, too. I mean, then you see his work. It's Dali-esque. There's all sorts of melted features and a lot of flight. I think the world that Harvey lived in didn't have gravity, that everything floated around and that it just sort of came to be. I know the family is still seeking one piece that they saw, and, my dream is to connect that with the family. I would love to bring something back, find something for them to have to remember their dad and their brother.
And what sort of other Harvey heads or collectors have you encountered as you've been doing your research? Is there a community of people like this?
So this past week on the popular bidding site eBay, I decided to try to pick up a few more because Christmas is coming and I wanted to buy myself some more Harveys. And I got outbid by several people. You know, the price range of a gospel album cover with the record, too, is pretty basic. I mean, we're talking, $10, $12. Some of these Harveys, 3 of the Harveys went for more than $100. They're in the $60 and $70 range regularly now on some of the more obscure, and it's got to be more of the abstract art. One of the speculations, talking with Bob Marovich, who's with the Journal of Gospel Music, one of our fears is that people are buying it, throwing away the record, just collecting the art now. I do have a feeling that more and more people are sort of seeing this, recognizing the artwork, and it's talking to them the same way it sort of talked to me.
Gotcha. And let's get back to your master's thesis. What would you say is the focus of it exactly?
Well, the focus of my master's thesis is the influence and the impact of Harvey's work. The fact that, the role of an album cover and what it does, and how through all gospel music, and especially in the golden era that we focus on from 1945 to 75, there's some exploitation too. I mean, Harvey was paid $25 a cover for this stuff. The musicians were probably, most likely paid in just albums that they could sell. It was a struggle at the same time, too, the message that was going out during this time. If you imagine post-war through the civil rights era. I mean, there were a lot of messaging going on, a lot of pressures too. So one of the things that sort of rose to the top is, Harvey just sort of played along on this and did make some money on it, but nothing sustainable. I think just the struggles that he had and his story is sort of amazing. But the fact that he helped sustain, this part of this industry at Savoy Records through this period is kind of phenomenal. I love the fact that you're getting so much more. You're getting something that you could really cling to and see. Harvey's art, I refer to it sort of flippantly as clip art. I think, there is a connection when you do see this and you hear the music together, that sometimes it really does click, and then you have all this in one unique package. He never, by all reports, he never got to really meet with any of the artists. He basically got a theme or two to go off of sometimes, and then some of it was just what he thought represented religion. And the way that it transforms there, too, that the fact that, gospel at this time kept people together, and the fact that he sort of pushed these boundaries that led into arguably more and more abstract art, and letting the cover be a nice place as a soapbox to present something that was different, to present something that was a little edgier, to present something to sort of push you into that third effect where it was music and art, but collectively it was a feeling. It's an emotion. And for people to have that and to purchase it and own it, it's sort of fantastic.
Well said.
My thesis will be a little more coherent, I hope.
I don't know. You had me going.
It'll be a lot longer. I've got 59 more pages to go.
Uh-huh. So I want to get back to what we know about Harvey's life. You mentioned later in life working in a funeral home and having arthritis. Was he sort of the stereotypical starving artist, best you can tell?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when talking to his son, Keith, he did say to me, he's like, the phrase starving artist is real. We were literally starving. And that's why he had to give this up. Harvey had several marriages, family strife, life as an artist in New York at the time. It had to be difficult. I know that the family had always been concerned that whatever money he made on Saturday, he would have spent by Tuesday or Sunday in some cases. So his art was being recognized. He was an up-and-coming artist. He actually, had the credentials. Being in the Student Art League in New York was impressive. Should he have pressed the art more? I'm not sure that there's a market there unless you go into fine artwork or what he could have done with that. The family always felt like he should have charged more or, sort of pressed him to value his work more. And I think it was just part of the struggles of being an artist that he had to realize that this couldn't sustain his life and this couldn't sustain his family that he had. He had young children at the time and had to care for them. So he did marry a woman whose father had a funeral home and went on to sort of fill out his life like that, and no known art after when he gave this up. So he only worked for a short period of time. He was like a shooting star, if you will, where he came out with these brilliant images and this vibrant color, but flared out so soon and never to be seen again.
Was part of you a little sad when you found out that the mystery of Harvey's identity had been resolved? Was it almost more fun not knowing?
Yeah, I love a good mystery, and it almost seemed too easy. When I found his sister at first, it took a little edge off of this. It's almost like when you pull open the curtain, you see who Oz is, and you want some mystery in your life, and especially when you look at these covers. And just individually or collectively, once you see all these colors exploding at you, and it's sort of, when the family, they only have very few pictures of him. Harvey as a young child, and then Harvey later on in life. And when you see him and put a face to him, all of a sudden it's jarring a little bit. I do love a good mystery, but I wanted to sort of find who this was and actually prove it. When I saw his student records, it was kind of funny because he only studied life composition. His son tells a story. He was a teenager at the time and would go with his dad every Saturday afternoon to the art studio. And I asked him why, and he's like, well, I'm a teenager, and they had these nude models all the time. This was a great way to grow up. And, but it was no way to live. It was no way to sort of survive like that. And part of me wishes that all these websites that have Harvey as a mystery would still be a mystery. But I sort of need to draw a conclusion to it so we see how difficult it was to live. People of color living in the 50s and 60s, and just the pure exploitation, and just especially when we're talking about gospel music too, in particularly faith, religion, and music, and that it still wasn't a chance for someone of color to advance.
Yeah. I'm wondering for you also what it's been like for you to connect with Harvey's sister. I know her name is Margot. As you've gone down this road, in terms of information for your work, it must have felt like you hit the mother load, or I guess the sister load, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. When your research starts out as a joke, when somebody tells you to find something that no one else has found, and there's all this speculation, and then when I just sort of fall into it, it was almost meant to be. Margot and I are friends, and we keep in touch. We visited together, went up to see her at her home in D.C. this summer, and it's almost like she was part of my family. I don't have a direct connection with gospel music other than through this collection. She doesn't have any of her brother's work other than a painting he did of her. Yet we're sort of drawn together cosmically, and it's from this mysterious guy that didn't even want to put his last name on his artwork. It's as surreal as the work he created. I mean, there's no reason why I should be sitting here talking to you about Harvey work. A few years ago, I had no knowledge of him at all and the impact that he had. And I doubt that he knew the impact he had.
But an obsession is born now.
Yeah, I'm hooked. I've promised I'm only covering 2 walls with his covers. I'm going to do the diligent thing, and all the music that I gather, if it's not part of our collection already, we're going to have digitized so it's shareable through the Baylor collection. But, there's something about just hanging this up and seeing this. Harvey being so mysterious was sort of haunting to me. And now that I know him, and it's a much more intimate thing, it's almost like hanging up family pictures now. I'm part of them, and they're part of me.
I can imagine. So one last question for you. How do you think Harvey and his work should be remembered?
Part of me as a collector wants no one to bid against me. And on the other token, I do want people to know what a struggle it was. And I do want people to know that artists, by and large, do have this voice within them that they're trying to release. Harvey got to release his voice on these covers. I think my work to help put into perspective of who he is and how he did this, knowing that all of this original work is lost, that there's absolutely no track or trace of any of these album covers' original work. The family saw them when he would bring them home just to sort of show them off before he took them to the record producer. Savoy Records was the last stop, and then most likely they were all destroyed. So to have a collection that you could purchase still and keep that is so limited and has some artistic value is kind of an interesting perspective. Harvey might shy away from this sort of attention, and I don't want to oversell it or overpush it either, because I don't want to go against Harvey's wishes, even though he's no longer with us. I think he'd love to be remembered for being so absolutely positively different. And that's the way he lived his life. That he wanted to be sort of this vibrant splash in a collection filled with just the mundane black and white captures. I think he wanted to be that color, and he wanted to introduce us to this larger-than-life vision of his.
And you're helping to keep that vision moving forward.
Yes, since I've got the support of the collection here that we have with the gospel collection, my vision is to help tell the Williams story, both with Harvey and his sister Margot and his son Keith. And the connection we have at Baylor, we've been working with the Smithsonian on different collections that we have with the Gospel Project, sermons for one part and the music. And I'm hoping that we can get a broader audience. So imagine, that's collector's heaven, right? The Smithsonian. Imagine if we could get some Harvey covers and more interest in just telling the story of a starving artist who didn't starve long enough to produce this body of work and to show that off. I love all the things I've collected over my life, but I feel sad for it sometimes when it's not on proper display. I think ultimately I'd love to give Harvey and his work the proper display.
Well said. Okay, Robbie, that's everything I've got for you. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me in between UPS deliveries.
I've got a box cutter ready because you have to open these really carefully.
Sure. So thank you so much for leading the way down the Harvey rabbit hole for us. It's all been fascinating stuff.
I really appreciate you taking the time and the interest, too.
No, it's been fun.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Take care, Robbie.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, it certainly seems as though the legacy of Harvey Williams is getting stronger. And Robbie Rogers has as much to do with that as anyone. And it's a win-win situation. The Williams family is getting to enjoy the recognition on Harvey's behalf, and Robbie is enjoying a new hobby of collecting, as well as the gratification of bringing the spotlight to an influential, if once unknown, artist. Actually, it's a win-win-win if you count the extra business for UPS. For Keeps is a production of me, David Peterkowski. Thanks to Robbie Rogers for chatting with me about his work collecting and celebrating the art of Harvey Williams. On the For Keeps website, you can see a photo of Robbie with some of his favorite Harvey album covers. And in the show notes, there's a link to harveyalbums.com, where you can peruse the comprehensive collection in all its colorful, offbeat glory, as well as a link to a terrific biography of Harvey written in 2018 by his sister, Margot Lee Williams. One other thing. If you're a gospel music collector and you're interested in donating or loaning materials to the Black Gospel Music Restoration Project at Baylor University, you can find a link to that website in the show notes as well. The show's theme song is by the band Still Flyin. The closing theme is by Eric Frisch, and additional music for this episode was provided by Chris Zabriskie. As always, you can visit the show's website at forkeepspodcast.com or follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at forkeepspodcast. Thanks for listening to For Keeps. Until next time, keep on keeping on.